Hello, everyone. Welcome, all of you, to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me are two of the most important people. Oh, I cannot say that because everybody else is important. But with me are my dear friends, Dr. Anahy Fonseca and Jussara Korngold. Welcome. I don't know if you want to say hello to everyone who's here.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Marcia. Hi, and I say hello, everyone. Good to be back.
Yes, it is so good to be back. And if this is the first time you're watching our podcast, I'd love to say thank you. Welcome to our program. And please note that the Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. We're here to offer a safe space to confront and compare, and most important, expand concepts from two lenses, a spiritual and psychological lens, to bring insights and sometimes even real world advice or examples for us to better understand. And I just wanted to say to all of you that I am quite fascinated with the series of discussions we've had about anxiety. We started with general definitions. We talked about tools in our toolbox. We even went on to talk about what did Joanna de Angelis say to us, tell us about anxiety, and we went through a comprehensive. It was quite a match between me and Jussara if she could go on with some examples or quotes from Joanna and give us a better explanation. She did a great job. Just check our earlier episode for that if you're interested as well. But anyways, we're here, we're back, and wanted to continue that discussion on anxiety. But today we're going to do a bit of a cross reference. How is this topic, anxiety, seen or discussed or presented to us by Sigmund Freud, Carl Gustav Jung, and of course, Joanna de Angelis? We focused a lot on their spiritual side beforehand. So today we have our resident expert to provide a more scientific reference to us. Hang in there. I think this will be a really great episode. Before we start our conversation, Jussara and Anahy, I would like to recognize the organizations that are sponsoring our program. Thank you. TV Mansão do Caminho, the United States Spiritus Federation, the International Spiritus Council, and AMI Brazil. And for all of you, please hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. If you'd like to understand more, check our channel, www.spiritist.us. And if you have any thoughts, comments, critique, feedback, questions, please use the chat window. I'd love to hear from you. But here I am, Jussara and Anahy, and I came across a word that I don't use that often, zeitgeist, or the spirit or essence of a particular period of time, a period of history. And we can define that as a spirit or mood of a generation or a point in time. For example, I don't know, many of individuals talking about the zeitgeist of Germany pre-World War II, right? What was going on that time. But could I say that the zeitgeist of our time, which means our prevalent ideas, beliefs, and even behaviors, is one of perhaps a lot of anxiety on one hand, and perhaps on the other hand, this incredible need and awareness that we must grow spiritually, right? If I think about it, and I would say Joanna de Angelis will perhaps confirm this suspicion when she says that anxiety is a symptom of this deeper existential crisis that we're going through. So let's go ahead and spend the next few minutes together exploring what did Freud say, if at all, about anxiety? What did Jung say? And if what they said maybe contradicted or supported the statement. shall we? So, for both of you, how can we talk about anxiety without a definition? Can we perhaps bring a definition from Joanna, from Jung, or from Freud? What'd you say?
So, should we start? Well, first of all, it's great to be
Yeah.
here with you again and with everybody that is listening to us. So, I think Marcia started with the big picture, the
Hmm.
spiritual dimension of the psyche, right?
Hmm.
And the zeitgeist, so the spirit of our times. We live in a very anxious times, we can say that,
Hmm.
because I think we live in a paradox. We are in a verge of a big shift in consciousness. Joanna is always asking us to remember that we need to learn about ourselves. I think we have talked about in one of the episodes about Jung's sentence, the world hangs on a thin thread or something like that.
Yeah,
And this, because of the psyche, that we are actually our choices, what we do with ourselves in our life, and collectively will reflect in the whole. So we are a co-creator of our own reality, right?
beautifully said. Beautifully said. Yes.
Yes, Jung said that. We have talked a little bit about that,
Yeah.
right, Marcia? And it's very important because Joanna is bringing us um, this zeitgeist, I think, of this time, our time, that is the paradox between a very materialistic world, right?
Hmm.
That searches for pleasure, pleasure of the body, pleasure of the ego, the needs of the ego, and well, people kind of forget when they are so materialistic and drive um, the an answer to this drives of materialistic pull, right? I need this and I need that. So it's a very narrow worldview, right? Because then I view the world and myself and everybody else as a person and that has needs, and that it's going to live this life and everything ends in the end. And okay, so I will have the most pleasure that I can have in this life, and don't bother with anything else.
Hmm.
So, but at the same time, we are in a spiritual awakening because now we have a lot of spiritual information. For
Hmm.
instance, with the spiritist knowledge and many spiritualist religions and thoughts and philosophies, right? People are looking for meaning
Yes.
and purpose in life. So this is spirituality, to look for meaning and purpose. This is the path, let's say, in psychological terms.
Yeah.
And we are in a paradox. We are in a crisis because there are two strong forces in our psyche and the collective unconscious, right? So
Hmm.
this materialistic and very egotistic worldview, and at the same time, a spiritual awakening. Wow, this is a this is a crisis. And Jung and also Joanna say that we need this kind of crisis
It's almost like this
because
tension, right? This
yeah,
polarization that pushes and pull you into different directions.
yes, that's exactly it. So in psychological terms, just remind me of Jesus in the cross, right? That we
Yes.
say psychologically, it's a very powerful image because there are forces that pull you towards
Hmm.
different um, um, directions, right? And you
Yes.
have to hold it. So he
Yes.
was also giving an example of how we ascend to balance and to hold everything that keep us apart, let's say, and so to be able to develop another consciousness. Okay, so that's why I think the zeitgeist of our times have all this anxiety that, and I brought you a case that I remember, an example
Yeah, go
of this.
ahead. Yeah.
But well, I don't know, should I say before?
Well, I asked you to define
Okay.
anxiety, but let's backtrack. Everyone here, I would like to have Anahy give us an example.
Okay. Okay, I'll give the example first because I think it's interesting for people to, to we know if we haven't felt something like this,
Uh-huh.
then somebody from the family or friends.
Yes. Yeah.
So we should define, I think, not only in books, but we this zeitgeist that you talked, Marcia,
Yeah.
this spirit of the time. It's very important that we don't stuck only to to the books and to definitions, but intellectually speaking, but we
Yeah.
connect to the definitions, let's say, that will show what happens to us through the intelligence of the heart. If I
Love
don't
it.
feel,
Yes.
it doesn't matter how I think or how much I have read about the subject, I won't change. That's the sad reality. We need the mind, we need to read and study, but we need the intelligence of the heart to discern, to change attitude. That's
Yes.
I'm giving you a spoiler because Jung's thought about anxiety and this
Yeah.
neurosis that gives us anxiety as a symptom. It's all about changing attitudes. This is a spoiler, but that's just an example. So an example first,
Yes.
because it's a synchronicity, and that we would be talking about that, and then I remember some years ago, so around a 35-year-old woman, right? That told me that she had like panic attacks because that's the
Hmm.
worst of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
When it turns to panic attacks. Okay, and okay, that's classical. I'm going to die because my heart is so, is racing, and
Hmm.
I think I'm having a heart attack, and I have to rush to the emergency room in the hospital. And of course, the cardiologist, no, is everything all right with your heart? Oh, don't you want to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist? And sometimes people get mad, but I'm feeling my heart and
Yes.
I'm going to die and all this stuff. Well, but the clinical exam and the machine say you are right. So what happens in this moment that that we feel you are so afraid, and you are like certain, and your mind is telling you that you are going to die because of a heart attack or something like that. So that was her main concern, and it was, and then I asked her how long this had been going on. And since she was like 12 years old, like more than
Oh my
20
goodness.
years,
Yeah.
more than
It
20
hurts me
years.
to hear that, Anaí,
Yeah, and
that
you hear
someone has
all
been
the
going
time.
through this for so long. But yes, it affects so many of us, right? But go ahead.
Yeah, so many of us. So everything, like study, job, relationships, get the impact of, you limit your life because you're not going to be able, you have to kind of try to control the triggers that, and you kind of don't know very well what the triggers are because there's unconscious stuff, right?
Yeah.
That we are not dealing with that. And so, okay, but then she comes to me, she's more mature now,
Hmm.
35 going to 40. That's something important because then the ego kind of say, okay, so if I have to face some stuff, something unconscious, because I have been so many times to the emergency room, and
Yeah.
I'm seeing a psychiatrist, and I'm taking some medicine, but anyway, my life is, it's very limited because I'm afraid that I'm going to feel, and I feel anxious anyway. I can control the panic attacks because they are the worst part of the anxiety. But the anxiety is there, is a symptom, right? And symptoms, as Jung says, are the path for the inner. It's the psyche telling us something. We have to listen to the symptoms, not fight them. Try to, oh, I just want to be fine. I don't want to feel anything. Okay, nobody wants to, to feel this kind of symptoms. But if we don't listen to the if we don't try to see what the psyche is telling us, trying to tell us through the symptoms, right? And the psyche, remember, it's myself, my unconscious. It's me. It's not somebody else's stuff or issues, right? It's me. It's my unconscious. So, okay, what happens is that when I just make it short for you, just to have an idea, when you go to the person's story, one of the first thing that because I deal with it, I always ask is about the person's faith and spirituality, and if the person has a religion, okay. And what happened to this person, she kind of protected herself of philosophical and spiritual questionings. But then you always have to, because nowadays, as I told you before, and if somebody has never heard about that, the researches in the psychiatrist field and psychology field are showing that a person that develops her or his own spirituality is more mature, it's more resilient, and has more tools to face, challenges in life, psychological, physical challenges, okay, these illnesses or things like that. So you have to investigate this dimension of the psyche because it's so important, right? We
And it
know.
can be very, very self-serving, right? I will develop my sense of religiosity, spirituality, because it will make me better. Be as it may, it is a very interesting correlation between that spirituality and a sense of comfort, including dealing with some of those fear-based pathologies that it may include a panic disorder, right, or a pathological way of anxiety. So I think this
Yes.
is very important for us to really hone in. It's not just words. There are correlations, and I think it's a very important statement here, Anahy.
Yes, great, great, Marcia. Yeah, because we have to remember that symptoms,
Mm,
they are also a ways that the self, capital S, the higher self, because Joanna says it's not, it's our spirit, right?
mhm,
Is trying to send message through to the ego, right? So that the ego can understand that there is a dynamic in the unconscious that it has to pay attention to it. And it's very important to the development of the personality and to this task that we have assigned to do here in this life, right?
mhm,
So this person had closed, let's say, this kind of conversation, and had inner conversation, let's say, and had closed herself to search for meaning and purpose that we were talking in the beginning.
mhm,
So when you go in the story of the person, in the past, then look at that. What I remember this case because it was very. I think it's a
mhm,
very nice example. When
mhm,
you go to her past, she was the second child of a mother. Her brother was 6 years older than her, and the brother was there was some problem in the delivery, so he was He had paralysis, cerebral paralysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he couldn't talk, he couldn't walk, and the mother had to take care of him like almost 24 hours a day. So the
Mm-hmm.
mother decided after 6 years to have another child, and she was born. So she was born, actually, we could say without a mother.
Mm.
And she was raised by the grandmother, the mother's mother. But look at that. And then you can connect with Joanna and what you guys had been talking. The grandmother, okay, who raised her right after her birth, okay, had she had a daughter, the grandmother, so the mother's sister, her aunt, right?
Mm.
That was 30 years old, more or less 30, and had already one child, and she died suddenly.
Oh.
From what I remember, was something like a stroke in the head, something vascular or whatever.
Mm.
And she died suddenly. So it was the grandmother was grieving her baby daughter
Yeah. Yeah.
when this person, this lady, was born. Okay,
Mm.
so she raises the granddaughter, talking about that daughter all the time.
So she's at a
Remember,
crossroad, right? Between mm, kind of taking the place of the brother
yes.
and now the aunt. Oh my goodness. Oh
So
my
she
goodness.
brings
Yeah.
life to this family, but
Yeah.
she also comes right after a lot of loss and death, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was raised by, let's say, the mother who couldn't take care of her, and especially the grandmother, who never overcame the loss of her baby daughter.
Mm.
So she like introjected. It's a kind of put inside her, identified in a certain way
Mm.
with her dead aunt. Like she needed to be better. She needed to
Mm.
try to make the grandmother happy and her mother happy and everybody happy,
Mm.
but she totally forgot about herself, right? And what happens, can you imagine the level of anxiety if you are the person that you have to bring happiness to
Yes.
people that cannot feel happy by themselves, right?
So there's an
And you have,
incredible responsibility, don't you think,
yes.
to consciously or unconsciously to to have that projected upon her to be the conduit for happiness when we know happiness doesn't happen like this.
No, it's not like this. And
Yeah, yeah.
so she was like, without knowing, without being
Hmm.
conscious, she kind of her. We also often have talked here about our personal myth, right? So
Hmm.
our sacred story, as Joanna would say,
Hmm.
our purpose in reincarnating this life, of course.
Hmm.
Of course, we have to help each other. Of course, we have to learn how to love ourselves and learn how to love others. But there are tasks, evolutionary tasks, that only each one of us can do to us, let's say, right?
Yes,
Nobody can do, in our place. We are here to learn, to evolve, and this is something that we have to do. And so this woman didn't have like inner peace or inner space, and
mm,
even inner the time to grow and to be connected to herself and to see about her own needs. So she grew up having to make everybody happy,
mm,
which never would happen because people were not feeling allowed, the mothers, let's say, feeling allowed to be happy, because they needed to, well, the understanding why we had some We can have a child that with the illnesses, or even a child, it's very difficult, of course, a child that dies before what for us feels as, before the time, the right time when we are old. But this happens
Hmm.
to everyone in every family. So the mother has to go, of course, it's going to go undergo a very deep mourning period. But all of us, and I know that the pain is really deep,
Yeah.
but all of us have to find this meaning and the purpose,
Yes.
and remember that there are other people and other children that depend on us, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but my point was that the panic attacks were like, I cannot be happy. How am I going to be happy if I come from women that are like, couldn't have a life, couldn't fulfill their purpose in life or whatever, or at least she felt like this and couldn't be happy themselves. So it's my mother, my grandmother always said, always, word with others. So I have to, I if I don't pay attention, I will identify with this story. That's not mine. Because it's okay, it can be my mother, my grandmother, but it's theirs, it's not mine. So Jung, let's come to definition of
Yes.
anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because then it's easier, right? So Jung
And
says
and
that,
quite frankly, sorry for speaking over you, and I quite frankly, this story puts a really interesting context not only to any patient, not just this woman, that the context becomes very clear to us, her inability to be happy, right, which triggers a anxiety for many, many years and panic attacks, and it's really born out of something that can be seen spiritually and psychologically. But I think we can really extrapolate to most of us, right?
yeah.
It's easy for me to say that. Love to hear from you on Jung, and perhaps just that I'm going to ask you if you can bring me from Sigmund Freud's perspective. But go ahead, Anahy, tell us what does Jung tell us about anxiety, and how it really helps us understand this case.
So because Jung, well, I'll leave to Jussara to talk a little bit about Freud, but you can see that we are going from the big picture, Joanna, to the
Yes,
small picture. And
yes,
for me, I'm sorry about some Freudians that can be listening to us, but it's okay because it's a like Freud put like the first stone, right? When he talks about
yes,
the ego, about the repressed
yeah,
contents in the unconscious, but he talked about only the personal unconscious, right? And so that would be the first
yeah,
stone in the building.
yeah,
But Jung he talks about anxiety more like an existential his concern, because he went deeper in the psyche, in the collective unconscious, where he found the concept that we have been talking about the self, about what could call the higher self, and Joanna calls the
hmm,
spirit. So, but anyways, he talks. His concerns were more existential, and also dealing with the process of individuation, right? Of this
yes,
development here in this life. So, the anxiety would come from this confrontation, from the consciousness and the unconscious, but in a
hmm,
deeper way than Freud in the beginning realized. And also, like in when would be an imbalance between the ego, as in this example that I brought to you,
yeah,
and the view of the ego, let's say, of a situation of itself, and the self that knows better because it's the center and also the totality of the psyche. But let's hear about Jussara,
yeah.
about.
And I love Jusada, if you maybe reference, but it's this spiritual, much broader view, Joanna de Angelis, and then it goes deeper into the ego and the self with Jung. What would Sigmund Freud say about anxiety, Jussara?
Okay. So,
Putting you on the spot, right?
reflecting upon everything that Anahy brought to us, and
Yes.
bringing this life case, it's I mean, we feel sorry for everyone that is going through the same things, but at the same time, uh, it's so important to share stories like this one, because many times we feel like we are the only fish in the sea, right?
Yeah.
That there are things that are only happening to us. Many times we, on top of being anxious, we will go crazy trying to find validation for why do I feel so anxious, what would be the reason. And of course, we have a short-term memory. Most of the time we are just thinking about the events that have happened in the recent past. And
Hmm.
when we should be taking everything into consideration, not only in relation to this lifetime, but to previous incarnation. As we, when we are talking about spirituality, we are always considering that. And as we see in this case, I mean, the how hard her journey was, because she didn't know, and it's very much like uh, Freud talks about it, Joanna de Angelis talks about it, the childhood traumas.
Hmm.
And I mean, since we are a child and going through those traumas, of course we do not know how to deal with them. And later
Hmm.
on, for us to rationalize on top of things, oh, maybe I feel those emotions. I feel this way because when I was 0 years, or 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, I was expected to behave in a certain way. And of course, not having the complete remembrance, because when we come to an adult and say, tell me about the 5 years, first 5 years of your life, many of us do not go back uh, before, being a 5 year old, right? So we will
Hmm.
glimpses of things. And I think that, this is so great, and that you brought about, because this is when we need help. We need professional help. We need the therapy to, because I can only imagine in this case uh, how good she felt in knowing that there was a reason for that. Okay,
Yes.
I have to deal with that. I went through the pain. I'll have to go through the pain of, um, rebooting, right?
Hmm.
But now I know that there is a reason, because I think the worst feeling is not knowing.
Yeah.
And this is how, Joanna de Angelis says, in terms of, the anxiety, is this disconnection between the ego and the self, right?
Hmm.
When Freud himself talks about having to face what he calls a realistic anxiety that is related to things that happen in the real world, or
Hmm.
neurotic anxiety that comes from unconscious fears. And I think in many cases, I mean, although she was having this symptoms because of something that really happened to her real world,
Hmm.
for many years, it seemed to be just a neurotic anxiety, because she couldn't bring to mind, to the conscious, at the conscious level, that there was a reason for that. And
Hmm.
I know, I think that, many parents, educators right now may feel very anxious and nervous about everything, because, oh my God, what did I do with my children, with my students, everyone that we have an impact in life, because we didn't know better. but you see, in the same way that we perhaps contributed to some of the traumas that this, our children or these other
Mm-hmm.
have present nowadays, we can, now that we are more enlightened, especially, taking into consideration the life of the immortal spirit, and understanding that we are much more than just this life, and that we bring all this baggage with
Mm-hmm.
us. If things that happen in this life is impacting us, of course, what happened before, and this is when we are going to have no recollection at all, in
Mm-hmm.
the sense that it's not that we have lived them with our physical brain. So you really have to dig deeper, and that's why we see that where religion and spirituality comes to place. And I was thinking about, the studies that have been conducted in the past few years by Harvard, by Duke University. We have Dr. Harold Koenig that wrote that beautiful book about religion and health, and so many cases where, you know, you may have a Freud's perspective and say religion is nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the numbers don't lie. And the research is showing that somehow they may not know how to explain it, but somehow people that have some kind of faith, understanding, even, by thinking I'm so much more than just that, and I will go on, how they have more resilience, and even be more open to seek help.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
the case that Anahy said, she was exhausted of going just to the doctors, to hospitals, and having always the same result. There is nothing wrong with your heart. Oh my God, that's a great news, right? But there's else that you have to address. So I think it's such a fascinating topic,
It
and
it is. It is.
a lot of I think hope in ourselves as well. It is normal. We have those emotions, but we have to deal with them. We don't have to live with them when they are a source of suffering to us.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot a little bit our conversation today because I heard earlier, of course, Anahy is a Jungian therapist, so she favors Jung's role into our discussion today. So, but you mentioned, Anahy, about the unconscious, right? So Sigmund Freud brings to with the work that he has brought on as the founder of psychology, right? He brings to us the notion of a personal unconscious. And of course, Jung goes further and brings on the idea of the collective unconscious. Can we perhaps talk about um, how can we discuss anxiety from that perspective, the personal and collective unconscious? What are the other, perhaps even other, uh, thoughts in with researchers and theorists on that as well? Anything on that you guys can talk about?
Well, actually, Marta, you talked about zeitgeist, right? The
Yeah.
spirit of the
Mm-hmm.
time. And also Jussara remembered the very important questions of the spiritual realms and um, what connecting to what
Mm-hmm.
Joanna was saying. And of course, everybody knew, just a joke, that Oh, since I'm a Jungian, I'll ask Jussara to talk about Freud. To
I did
Jussara.
that. I did that, right, Jussara?
Yes, talk about Freud.
That
No,
is
I'm
terrible.
joking. I'm joking because I have we need. I studied a lot of Freud, of course, and and it's not only a joke. I said, "Oh, great that Marcia called decided to talk about." But because Freud also talks about anxiety because of the repressed material and
Right.
about the sexual drives and this and that, everybody knows that nowadays. And it's not so much stuff because we are in another century in terms of the repressed sexuality. We don't have this kind of repression as in the 19th century when he was observing patients and things like that. But in the zeitgeist, right, and the spirit of times of this anxious anxiety, all this anxiety and
Yeah.
the anxious spirit, let's say. And I think it's great that you asked because I'll just read a sentence for you. Is that when Jung talks about Freud and psychoanalysis, okay?
Ah,
He said,
wonderful.
yeah,
Mm.
he says the outbreak of the neurosis and anxiety is one of the biggest symptom and anxiety disorders and all that. So when he talks about neurosis, we can say he's talking about anxiety too. So the outbreak of the neurosis is not just a matter of chance as a rule, of chance. As a rule, it is most critical. It is usually the moment when a new psychological adjustment, a new adaptation is demanded.
Hmm.
So, he's saying it's not all something that is going to happen for whatever reason. Well, I have something in my unconscious only that okay, this, as Jussara was talking, and this was something great that Freud identified about the inner child and the childhood traumas, right? That we have to acknowledge them, we have to work them. They were sometimes cause of a lot of shadow issues, right? Our
Hmm.
shadows, like jealousy, hate, and things like that. But Jung says yes, but we have to go further because
Yeah.
what is this new psychological adjustment, a new adaptation that the neurosis is demanding? So we could see this in an individual lens, right? When I need a new attitude, a new adaptation. But when Jung says that it's not only about adaptation to the outside world, it's adaptation especially to the inner world, right? Because it's from there that the symptoms is coming. The symptoms, we can also, as we are saying, look at them as symbolic of a message that the higher self is trying to give to the ego, right?
This is quite
So,
beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. This is quite beautiful because when we talk about adaptation, uh, in my mind, it's always the ego um, pushing us or triggering us, driving us to adapt to the material world, right? This egoic construct that must be quote unquote successful to adapt to respond to the demands of the exterior world. But when you're saying that the ego also responds to that inner demands, it's quite interesting for all of us to reflect upon, don't you think?
I
oh
still
yes.
want to talk about Freud.
Oh, that's awesome.
I want to
Thank you.
reconcile with Freud.
Yeah.
Freud, he saw religion as being a collective neurosis that provided
Yeah.
temporary relief from anxiety, but
Uh-huh.
ultimately hindered true psychological growth. And I have to say that I partially agree with him
Yeah.
because we know that there are forms of worship that alienate people from society and the
Hmm.
advances of science. So when we are talking here about faith, spirituality, we are talking about, this being completely in sync, in tune with uh, with science. So we are talking science and spirituality, and this is why our podcast, spirituality, psychology, and spirituality, is all about reason, faith. And,
Mm-hmm.
and in this case, as we know that at his time, he was the byproduct of religions that were very uh, radical in their concepts. And so people would say, oh, just pray to God and everything is going to be okay. I'm anxious, but if I go and pray the rosary or if I go to the temple or whatever. So like we know today, that there are forms of, worship that unfortunately will prevent us from seeking relief, from seeking the right treatment. So, in this sense, I think, of course, he was absolutely radical in his position because he couldn't see a way out of it like Jung saw. But if we are taking his words for some of religious representations of today, he's right, because then, I'm masking my symptoms,
Yeah.
what is happening to me, because this cannot be so. God has to help me, etc., etc. I think you got my point, and thank you, Freud, for your.
It's great that Jussara, you brought this, because it's exactly Freud concerning religion. We cannot say that everything that he said, because, okay, he was like radical, saying that religion was a neurosis, shared neurosis, obsessive compulsive in a certain way neurosis. But of course, he was talking about people that use religion, and fanaticals, for instance, are people that use religion to disguise, let's say, so that people can understand, disguise other drives. So,
Mm-hmm.
in this point, of course, it is neurotic, this kind of drive towards religion. But you said something really important, because of course, he couldn't see the whole picture. That when Jung comes in, and as Marcia brought the question about the collective unconscious. So what we know is that not so much religious, because religion can be like a cultural or family, way of connecting to the sacred. But spirituality, in a sense that we were talking about meaning and purpose, right? So if I put my psychic energy, the libido, in a religion, because I'm disguising, let's say, other drives like sexual drive and things like that I cannot deal with, then of course it's neurotic. But if I can, like, this energy, I use this energy, this psychic energy, to develop my spirituality, then we are talking about a whole other issue, right? And that's the spiritual awakening that it's happening to a lot of people that we were talking in the beginning. So I will just connect everything, because I know we are coming to the end, and
Yes.
say that what Marcia said, it's very important, because in the sense, when we do the inner work, when we understand anxiety and other psychological and psychiatric symptoms, right, as asking ourself, our capital S, our higher self, asking or calling our attention to the inner dynamic, psychic dynamic, that I have to pay attention to grow and to fulfill the purpose of the self in this life, what I've come here to learn, right? So all this psychic energy comes free from that neurosis. That's why Jung was saying, and can help me find a new path in life. And if I do that, that's the process of individuation in a sense, then collectively, I'm helping everybody do the same. That's the spiritual awakening. So that's why, in a psychological lens, so that's why Jung says, and I quote, a wholehearted dedication to life. It's what he said about a new attitude of the ego, and which would make the powerful. He's talking about the need of a new attitude, right? When I feel that I'm being neurotic, and okay, this is not a heart attack, I have to pay attention to my inner world. So he says that which makes this new attitude the powerful urge to develop our own personality,
Mhm.
an imperative duty, he says. So I have to pay attention, and I have an obligation with myself, with my soul purpose, to develop my own personality. And this means to pay attention to my symptoms in a way that we are talking now, to discover, to open the channel of conversation with my inner world. If I do that, I can help the collective, because I'm creating to myself a new path of spiritual development, of maturity, of higher consciousness, as Joanna de Angelis asks us to do. And then I
Mhm.
help the collective. If I don't do that, I'm not helping the collective. I don't know if I answered you, Marcia.
You
And
did. It did beautifully, and I think this really brings us a really good closure about what we wanted to do today, which is that a comparison between Joanna, Jung, Freud, and it's very interesting because if you think about Joanna de Angelis, she offers a quite comprehensive yet unique perspective on anxiety, right? And in her books, for example, The Integral Human Being, where she really talks about that integral, integrated, right, human being. But in doing so, she's bringing spiritual and psychological insights that are quite complementary, including complementary to the theories of Freud, Jung, and even others in modern psychiatry. So I believe this is really interesting for all of us to better uh, dive deeper into the subject. Let's remove any taboo that may exist on discussing anxiety. That's the zeitgeist of our time, that so many of us are dealing with fear, anxiety, neurosis, and in many cases also panic attacks or panic disorder. So let's all be courageous, and the courage, the biggest courage of all for all of us, is to have the courage to go within, look at ourselves, and resolve some of those conflicts that may be apparent or not. Thank you. Thank you, Jussara. Thank you, Anahy. Thank you, who is here with us watching our podcast, our program, and we'll see you next time.